for our next presenter here, this is my cousin. His name is Mike, and it's just such a pleasure and privilege to have someone with so much experience in our family, plus so much passion for the job that you've done and continue to do. So thanks, Mike, for being here and for sharing with us a whole different perspective. We've never had someone speak on wildland firefighting before. So this is a real new point for us. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks everyone for being here. I'll say right away, you guys are a much quieter class than the 8th graders I just left. So I wish I could mute them sometimes, but anyway. So yeah, the reason I'm here to talk to you guys today mostly is because, well, you know, I call him Dara, you might call him Dr. Ramprasad, but he's my cousin. And after I had resigned from my firefighting career, he reached out to ask if I'd be interested in speaking. It took me a couple years to kind of get the time and the courage to do it, but I'm here now. Just my main thing is just I want to share my story, talk about Wildland Fire, the ups and the downs, some of the positives, and of course some of the negatives that it did to me. And I think even though there may not be any wildland firefighters here today, I think that a lot of the symptoms I went through because of my job are similar to that of other high stress jobs. So I'll just start out a little bit about my career. I worked for the United States Forest Service from 2003 to 2020. I started my career on what's known as a hand crew, which is a crew of 20 people who go to wildland fires and they cut fire line and do backfiring operations mostly. After that one season, I worked on a hotshot crew, and I spent the bulk of my time on a hotshot crew. I think within the last 10 years or so, more of the public has become aware of what hotshot crews are and what they do. During my time as a hotshot from 2004 to 2010, we were kind of out of the public eye. A lot of people didn't know what we were. And then after the incident in Arizona in 2013, where 19 hotshots were killed on a fire, that the hotshot crew thing kind of came into the public eye. I did the hotshot thing until 2010, and that's just a 20-person crew that's pretty highly trained. They've got a lot of experience, and they typically go to the most difficult, hottest, and dangerous parts of a large wildland fire. After the 2010 season, my plan was to become a smoke jumper, but I got injured. So I wound up going to a wildland fire engine, which is just like a 500-gallon engine. It's called a Type 3 engine with 500 gallons of water. And your job is to go put water on the fire. And then after I left the engine, I went back to a hand crew for a while. And then I left the hand crew and I got into fire prevention and investigations, which I'll get into a little bit of that later. And then I finished my career as a dispatcher in an interagency dispatch center where I dispatched wildland fires, structure fires, and medicals. The only thing I didn't dispatch there was law enforcement. We didn't do law enforcement through our center. I resigned from the Forest Service in August of 2020, and I became a middle school teacher. I teach 8th grade social studies and English at the same middle school I attended, and that's where my wife works too. And like I said, Dr. Ramprasad is my cousin, so I can't mess this up, right? I gotta do this right. I grew up in a rural community. Susanville is a tiny little town in the northeastern corner of California. I grew up playing sports, outdoor activities, like play chess. I like to read. I did stand-up comedy for about 15 years throughout the course of my fire career. So that was kind of a hobby I had. And I'm married with 2 small children. So my goals for today, since I teach school all day, I don't want to have like really hard objectives, and obviously I don't want anyone taking notes, but the reason I'm here is I want to explain, first to tell my story, the good and the bad, but today of course is going to be mostly the bad because we're talking about trauma and PTSD. But I also want to explain how the culture and the trauma of wildland fire influenced my decisions, habits, behavior, and health. And a point that I'd like to make is that, yeah, the culture hazards and stressors of wildland fire are probably different than other professions, but I think the human reaction to that stress is the same. I have a lot of friends who are police officers, correctional officers, military, structure fire, EMT, doctors, nurses, even teachers, and the way that they react to the stress and the trauma is pretty much identical to the way that I did in fire and a lot of my firefighting friends did. My career has two stories. Like I said, you're probably going to get most of the sad part today. And maybe another time I'll have the chance to tell, you know, that the good part, that it was also one of the best experiences of my life. All right, we'll get to the beginning. This picture of me here, it's funny to me for a few reasons. This is my second year as a wildland firefighter, my first year on a hotshot crew. I was 21 years old. The first thing, I was reluctant to show it because I'm wearing white sunglasses, which was like a huge sin in the wildland fire world. I had to learn that the hard way. I was ridiculed for wearing white sunglasses, which is one of those weird culture things. And then the other thing, I look at this picture and I remember this shift. This was a fire by Napa, California, by Geyserville in wine country. And it was a very hard shift, but I'm having a really, really good time here. It was very hard, dangerous shift. It was a 36-hour shift. This is probably about 16 hours into it, but I'm having the time of my life, right? The before. So this is what you look like at the beginning of fire season, right? And then the after. There's what you look like after the season. You look like a rundown homeless person. This picture here was taken as a joke, but it's pretty funny. It's a really good depiction of a before and after of the beginning of a season towards the end, or even the beginning of a career towards the end. But back to the beginning, living in a place like Susanville, California, you are exposed to wildland fire at an early age because we have tons of fires up here. I never wanted to be a firefighter as a kid. The superintendent of the Lassen Hotshots, the crew that I eventually worked on, was my neighbor as a kid. So I knew about hotshots and I knew about all that, but it wasn't something I wanted to do. And then when I was about 19 years old and I was in college, a bunch of my friends and I just thought it'd be a good idea to become seasonal firefighters and make some money for school or whatever. So we applied. It took me 2 years to get hired. And I would work the fire season from May to about the beginning of November. And we would travel all over the country fighting wildland fires. You go out for 2 or 3 weeks, come home for a couple of days off, you go out again for 2 or 3 weeks. And it's the perfect job for a young single person. I didn't have any financial obligations. I didn't have a family. So I was more than happy to go wherever I wanted or go wherever they told me to at a moment's notice. 6 o'clock in the evening, you think you're going to go home, in 2 minutes. And then they say, hey, get in the trucks. We're going to Montana, perfect. So for the most part, it was pretty cool. But early in my career, in my first 2 seasons, I had 2 near misses where the crew was almost burned over. One took place in Oregon my first year, and I was pretty frightened and traumatized, but I was brand new and I was trying to prove myself, so I didn't tell anybody. And then the next year when I actually got on the hotshot crew, we were nearly burned over in Arizona, in a place called Mount Graham, which is by Safford, Arizona. And that was known as the Nuttall Fire. And we were able to get out, we escaped, but the hotshot crew working down below us had to deploy their fire shelters, which are those aluminum, they look like little sleeping bags, kind of like tents. And you get in and you use those to deflect the radiant heat. Fortunately, nobody was killed and everyone was okay, but that incident stuck with me in the back of my mind. It was sort of the beginning of my symptoms of PTSD that I didn't fully come to recognize until about 13 years later. So my career wears on. So I was still having fun, but I started to shift in attitude. And I'm sure my friends and family, especially friends outside of fire, would probably notice, I became much more irritable. I drank too much alcohol. I was really involved in the hotshot crew culture, which is, I believe, and from the time I've spent with other first responders and military people and hospital workers, and each of those high stress jobs kind of has their own culture. And then in the world of firefighting has its own culture, but wildland firefighting in particular for the federal government has its own culture. And then hotshot crews are even like their own little anomaly in there. You live with the same people, the same 20 people, you travel with them, you eat with them, you sleep with them. You live by all of these very, very strict rules. If you're not on fires, you're doing, brutal physical training every day. And, you're out in the woods cutting down trees. So you become a little bit calloused. And looking back, I think I was kind of an asshole, maybe a big time asshole at times, but at the time I was just immersed in the culture, kind of like drinking the Kool-Aid, if you will. But in a way, it has to be that way, I think. And if I was to go back to a hotshot crew right now, I'm almost certain I would probably go right back to being that person, just because of what you're doing every day. And it has to be fast and aggressive and blunt communication, and all of those things are good to keep you safe on the fire line, but most of those things are not good in the regular world when you're trying to have a family or friends or interact socially. So some of the things I did to combat that is that I would prefer to only hang out with other firefighters, because I felt like I fit in better, and I didn't really fit in so much in the real world. Like I was a seasonal firefighter, so I had the winters off, but I would go to school, go to college, and as the years wore on, I wasn't really relating to other friends that weren't in fire. And I was also scared a lot. Fighting fire is scary, and you have to compartmentalize the danger and the near misses and fatality fires. And one of my coping mechanisms was to try to do more dangerous things on fires, to volunteer to do more dangerous things. I was what was called a sawyer, which is a chainsaw operator. So I would cut down a lot of dangerous trees and volunteer for dangerous backfiring assignments, because I thought if the more I put myself in those scary situations, the more I would get used to it and I could shake this fear. And then the other thing I did to cover up my fear and anxiety and depression was being funny. I was a comedian and I would make people laugh. And that's a really good way to hide your insecurities and your fears and your bad attitude and your depression, is to be funny. And I was really good at that. So I did that. And then I thought the next step after doing all these years on a hotshot crew was to become a smoke jumper. And so I started training really hard for that. My roommate in the winter he was a smoke jumper, and he was somebody that I grew up with my whole life. So I knew him really well. And he was training me and he got me into great shape. And then when the time came to apply for that, I injured my back and I couldn't go do it. So then I was kind of lost. So I decided to go work on an engine crew, because the workload is much less than hot shots and smoke jumping. So I did a year on an engine. My back wasn't healed, but I thought I was going to try to go jump anyways. So I applied. I got hired for the rookie training, and then I washed out of the training, which was at that time the worst thing that had probably happened to me in my career. And I was very depressed. I wasn't sure if I wanted to fight fire anymore. It was kind of like in my own little world, that was like the end of the world for me, because that was one of my dreams in fire, was to become a smoke jumper. I was bitter that I had been injured. I felt soft for washing out. So I didn't really know what to do, but I had to have a job. So I went back to the engine crew for a year. And then after that, I was picked up permanent, which means I'm no longer a seasonal employee. I'm not working just the fire season. I'm working year round. And I got picked up as a squad leader on a 20-person type 2 IA crew. And what that means is it's just a 20-person crew that's like maybe one step below a hotshot crew. You do pretty much the same thing, but you have your crew's a little less experienced. So that's what I got into. I was working on the Type 2 IA crew. And on my first fire assignment, I was in Palmdale, California. And I was working with the chainsaw team. We were cutting brush, and I wound up dislocating my shoulder. Pretty bad, but I was able to get it back in on my own. And I can credit my mom for that, because my mom's shoulders used to dislocate, and she used to kind of sit down, and I remember how she would kind of relax and get it to slide back in. So it wasn't like a Mel Gibson Lethal Weapon type situation where you smash it into the wall. But I was able to get my shoulder back in, and then it was a couple miles hike off the fire line to the hospital. Got treated, got sent home, and I was going to be on light duty for 2 months. So back to Susanville. And so I got injured on June 6th. And then on June 10th, 2013, at about, actually, let me backtrack. On June 6th or June 10th, 2013, at about 5 in the afternoon, I was at work, but I'm on light duty and I have my radio on, and I'm hearing like really garbled radio traffic from far away about a firefighter down, but it's coming from so far away and it's so garbled, and it's like it's bleed over from another frequency. Nobody else heard it, and I forgot about it, and I went home. And then at about 9:30 at night, I got out of the shower and I saw that I had a missed phone call from a guy that I used to work with on the Hot Shots, and he's a Reading smoke jumper. And I thought it was weird that he was calling me. He's a close friend, but we don't talk all the time, and he wouldn't call me at 9:30 at night on a weekday. So I called him right back, towel wrapped around my waist. And he told me that my friend that I grew up with since I was 4 years old, that I lived with, he was my roommate, and he was training me when I wanted to be a smoke jumper. He told me that he had been killed that afternoon on a fire in the Warner Mountain Wilderness on the Modoc National Forest, when a burning limb fell out of a tree and struck him in the neck and the head and killed him. And dropped the phone, and I was hearing this weird noise. I didn't know what the noise was. It's like sounded like an animal dying. I'm like hearing this noise, and I'm like, what the hell is this noise? And then my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, ran in the room, and she thought I had, the noise was me yelling, and she thought I had dislocated my shoulder again. That's why she came in. But I had to tell her what happened. And she was very close friends with him because she grew up with him too. And he was the one that kind of set up my wife and I's relationship, because we started dating when he was my roommate. So that is the worst moment of my fire career and the worst moment of my life. And that spiraled into a bunch of other things. Shock. I went to my sister's wedding a week later, but don't remember any of it because I had to go to his funeral the next day. And then about a week later, the Granite Mountain Hot Shots were burned up in Arizona, which I was shocked. I got a message from my sister who told me that. She's in this conference right now, I think, but she sent me a message to tell me that one, and that one didn't sink in till months later because I was still in such shock from my friend's death. And I was on light duty, so I wasn't fighting fire. They sent me to go work in the lookout, which is up alone on top of a mountain where you look for fires and you call them in. And it wasn't a bad thing to be alone probably at that time. So I did that for a while. And then I got back to the crew in August and right back out to the fire line. And the first fire we went on, we were way out in the wilderness, and another one of my buddies who I grew up with, he broke his leg out there, and we had to call in the California Highway Patrol hoist ship to hoist him out with his badly broken leg. And they just lowered the screamer suit, which is a little harness, down through the tree line. And God, it was so narrow, you know. And I put him in the screamer suit, I attached him, I hooked him up, and I watched them pull him out. And I was relieved that he was going to be okay, but it was just another little bit of trauma to come right back to after, you know, my friend had died. But I just kept on rolling, finished the season. Right at the end of that season, I got a phone call. I was actually on a fire. It was December. It was a winter fire in Big Sur. And I'm scouting the fire in the redwoods. And I got a phone call from another buddy of mine that was on the Hot Shots. And he knew he wouldn't be calling me at that time either. So I was like, oh, what's this guy calling to tell me? And he was calling to tell me that another friend of mine that I grew up with and was a firefighter on the Hot Shots, he had cancer now. So another buddy of mine's got cancer. So off we go and just keep fighting fire, fight that fire through Christmas, fight some more winter fires because there's no snow that year. And then back to the spring 2014, and we're rolling. I'm a squad leader. We just got to go. It's go, go, go. My dad gets very sick, has a brain bleed, and trying to deal with that. Luckily, he almost died, but he survived that, which was another bit of trauma. And then that season was really hard, 2014, very busy. And I was starting to notice that I was having weird symptoms. I did not want to interact with people. I only felt comfortable on the fire line. I was relieved to get a fire assignment. You know, you go out, you live in the wilderness for 2 weeks, you're out of phone service. So nobody can call you to tell you that somebody died or somebody has cancer. The real world is gone, and you're only worrying about fighting fire, and you're just worried about eating, sleeping, working. You're not showering, you're sleeping on the ground, you're eating MREs. And I liked that. I liked that filthy isolation of just living in the woods and fighting fire, which may not be healthy, but it was easier than living in the real world where making decisions was complicated. You know, I could make a decision to call in helicopters and work with millions of dollars of equipment and defend structures, or, you know, do 1,000 acres of backfiring, but to decide what to cook for dinner or who to invite to the wedding was just too complicated. So I was really struggling with everyday life. I had been on other fatality fires, like, you know, before my friend's death, and I went on more fatality fires after. And that was also wearing on me, because I'd be on fires where somebody would get burned over or crash a vehicle or a helicopter crash. And I didn't know them, but I would be scared and a little traumatized and thinking about this could happen to me, or I would think about their family or their friends, because I knew how they felt because my friend had passed. And it was just really wearing on me. In 2015, I went to a fatality fire on the Modoc National Forest, the same forest where my friend was killed. And that a man, I didn't know him, but he was a Forest Service firefighter, was burned over. And I was really, really struggling at that point. And by then I was married and my wife was pregnant. And I'd been to a lot of dangerous fires in 2015. I was starting to get extreme fatigue, where you just, from all those years of trying to cover up mental health issues and just fighting really hard fires, I don't know if my family noticed if I was isolating or not, my parents and siblings, but I really didn't want to be around my family, not because I disliked them, but I love them, but I felt like I couldn't relate. I felt like an outsider. It was getting pretty intense. And around that time, 2014, my sister became a firefighter. So there's my sister and I felt like I was scared for her to be on fires, but I had to pretend like I was tough and I wasn't having this problem so I could lead her. But then I was worried about leading my own crew as well as keeping her safe. Even though I wasn't on the same crew with her, I almost felt I was always checking in, like wondering, hey, is her captain good? Is she going to be okay if she's out there? you know, and of course she was, and she's in better shape than I am, and she did fine. So my worries were unfounded, but it was another thing that was wearing on me. Like I said, 2015 was a game changer for me. These two pictures are taken around the same time. The one on the left is taken in September, and the one on the right is taken in the end of August. Both of these fires are in far northern California, which in my opinion is the hardest place to fight wildland fires. The far northwestern corner of Northern California, it has the gnarliest terrain, biggest trees, the worst poison oak, some of the most dangerous people that live up there, as far as meth cookers and cartel pot growers and outlaw pot growers, and people who hate the government. I mean, these are really rough places, but I like these two pictures because the picture on the left, standing on top of the mountain, above the tree line, above the smoke line, high elevation, this big smile on my face, looking happy. And that's the guy that I portrayed to my crew most of the time. In fact, when I resigned from the Forest Service and people found out that I had all these mental health problems, most of my crew members were shocked because they knew the guy on the left. But the guy on the right was how I really felt on the inside. And that guy on the right in that picture, that is on my 10th straight night shift. You know, obviously haven't showered in weeks, which is normal. That picture was taken about 1 a.m. Shortly before that picture was taken, I was up on that hillside by myself doing, using a drip torch to set a backfire. And we were trying to hold that fire on the road where I'm standing. And while I was up there, an oak tree came down. It was on fire, and it broke off at the base. And I heard it snap, and I heard it coming at me, and just instinctively, and you guys in other dangerous jobs know how that works. And if you're a psychologist, or you know too, your lizard brain, your amygdala, which is your response for fight or flight, it just kicked in. I don't remember diving out of the way, but I just dove and like tumbled down the hill, and the tree missed me by a few feet. And then I got back up, and I grabbed my drip torch, and I just kept burning. And the night before, on the same time, the exact same thing happened. So it was like 2 nights in a row that happened. And I got down to the road after I finished burning, and this guy on the crew, a young guy, he just snapped a picture of me. And when I look at it, I've got like the camera red eye, and I don't remember much else about that night. I don't remember the picture being taken, but I'm just kind of lost in that picture. I'm exhausted, I'm filthy, I'm burned out, I'm lost, and kind of like soulless almost. I sent that picture to my cousin PJ, and he told me that, you know, it looked like I didn't have a soul. And I feel that that's pretty accurate for that picture. You know, my wife at that time was 5 or 6 months pregnant. So to almost get killed 2 nights in a row was a lot to sort of process. And so, let me see here. I'm going to go here for a second. So after that 2015 season, my son was born. I named him after my friend who was killed. And I realized as a father now that I did not want to be gone on fires. I didn't want to go out. And so I made the switch to being a prevention and fire investigator, which is your own, you're kind of your own guy. You travel around by yourself in your own truck. And when fires start, you try to get there first and be an incident commander, but you also do school programs with Smokey Bear. And I was an arson investigation trainee, so I was learning that. And I was stationed, if you look at the picture on the left, down in that valley, that's Indian Valley in Plumas County, and it's one of the most beautiful places. I took that picture from one of our fire lookouts. And down in that valley is a little town called Greenville, California. And I worked in Greenville, California for 2 years. And if you go to Greenville, California today, it will not look like that, because during the Dixie Fire in 2021, Greenville burned to the ground, pretty much the whole town. So all this area you see in this picture is pretty much nuked out. I didn't work there anymore. I had left the Forest Service when that happened. But while I was working in Greenville, I happened to listen to a podcast one day in my office, And the guy talking was at the fire where the fire shelters were deployed in Arizona in 2014 when I was a rookie hotshot. And he was one of the people that deployed his shelter. And I didn't know him, but he was telling his story on that podcast and he started crying. So I locked myself in the office and I started crying because I realized that I was really scared on that day and I had been suppressing it for 13 years. So I locked myself in my office and I cried for an hour or so. But then I had to go to work. So that morning I cried instead of PTing, but that was a good workout anyway. And then I went to the office next door because the other fire prevention guy was a combat veteran and I'd known him for a long time and we had fought fire together. And his nickname is Noodles. And I said, Noodles, what the hell is going on? This is what's happening to me. And he said, Mike, you have PTSD. I'm not a doctor, but that's what you have. And I started thinking about different incidents I had, and memory loss was one of them. And that was probably the scariest one because I was getting lost driving around in my hometown, which only has a population of 10,000 people, and I have the whole town memorized. But here I am getting lost. So I know I'm kind of getting short on time, but another incident I want to talk about is I have surveillance cameras around my house because I live in a neighborhood with a lot of tweakers. And so you have to have cameras. And one day I was in my back driveway and I heard a snap, which is like the tree limb snapping. And I dove out of the way, just like I did on the fire. And I jumped back up and I went inside. I didn't really think anything of it, other than I looked over at the branch that came down and bounced off my truck. And it was big enough to probably give me a cut on the head, but it wasn't big enough to cause an injury. And I didn't think much of it. I didn't even think I really dove, but then I went back to my surveillance footage and I watched myself on the camera when the tree limb snapped. And it was like a Superman dive. I just like yelled and boom, and I dove and like crashed into the ground. And so in my mind, I just sidestepped it. But when I looked at the video of it, I realized how instinctive and kind of crazy my brain had become. I had gone to therapy when my friend died, but the experience wasn't very good because the therapist had never worked with first responders. My wife was trying to help me at this point, and she got me into a therapist in Reno, Nevada, which is 90 miles away from where I live. And that was helpful because they knew about first responders. When I was working in Greenville, I went to another fire and I happened to run into, the fire was down in Southern California. So I got sent down to Southern California and I shared a car ride with a guy to get out to the fire line. And he looked at me and he said, "What's wrong?" And I never met this guy in my life. And it just so happened, he was a Vietnam vet and he was there for ground support. He was drive people out to the fire line because my truck wasn't working at that point. And he knew right away something was wrong. And he just like a perfect stranger. And he talked to me and he said, you look like you're feeling it, man. Like you need to figure this out. And I took what he said to heart. And that was the last fire I ever went on. So I left that fire and became a dispatcher. So you see me on the right here. This is the picture of the Susanville Interagency Fire Center, where I was a dispatcher for 2 years. I thought dispatching would be better because the dispatch center is like 2 blocks from my house. So like John Elway could throw a football from my front door to the dispatch center. So figured I'll be home more. I'll be in the dispatch center. I won't be out on the fire line. But the dispatch center was worse than the fire line. It was even more chaotic and traumatic. And I was good at it. I knew what I was doing in there, but the medical calls were the worst. And even though I worked for the Forest Service, we were pretty much contracted in there to answer 911s and do ambulances and medicals. And there's 2 state prisons where I live. So we would dispatch medicals to the riots at the prisons, dispatch numerous medicals where people I knew had died, some suicides. It was rough, man. That job wore me down even more. So I wound up resigning in 2020. I knew I was going to leave in 2019. And I told my supervisors that I was going to resign. And eventually, I had a college degree because when I was a seasonal, I went to school. And so in March of 2020, I applied for a teaching position and I got hired. So at that point, I gave my official notice and I walked out. In July 25th, 2020 was my last shift. It was 18 hours. There was a large fire burning towards Susanville at that time. And I worked and I walked out and I thought on the surface that I could escape fire, reinvent myself. But deep down, I knew I was wrong because my personality and identity was shaped by fire. My friends are firefighters. I live in an area that's always has fires. Fires will always be a part of me. I can't go in the woods now without sizing up trees, think about how I'd fall them, think about where my escape routes are if there's a fire. I think about if I drive down the road and look at a ridge line, I think about how I would backfire it. So I used to love being in the woods for hunting and fishing and camping, and now I see it completely different. When I resigned, the chief asked me to write my reasons why, so he could send it to the regional level because Forest Service employees, fire employees are resigning a lot. And so I think he was asking for about a paragraph and I wound up writing 7 pages. And I emailed it to everyone I ever worked with. And then it went viral because a lot of people agreed with what I had to say. And then it was about mental health and pay issues and issues the Forest Service has. And then the media got a hold of my letter. So I wound up talking to the media a lot, which is good and bad. I don't particularly like it, but that's a good way to get your cause heard. So did a lot of media stuff, which was very uncomfortable, but I did it because I thought maybe it would help people who were struggling. But this is the first time I've talked directly to other first responders. And I like this better because I feel like you guys can relate to a lot of the things that I'm saying. As far as trying to escape fire, get away from it, this is my house a year after I resigned in August of 2021. This is the day that Greenville burned to the ground. Greenville is about 20 or 30 miles as the crow flies from my house, but that's what my house looked like in 3 in the afternoon. It was dark. So I can't get away from fire, and I probably never will, but I'm working on learning to live with it better. Since I left, I've had a lot more of my former firefighter friends die of cancer. My friend I mentioned earlier who had cancer, who was just diagnosed with cancer that year, he died 3 years later. I've had other coworkers die of cancer, heart attacks, substance abuse, mystery death, where I don't really know how they died and I didn't want to ask. COVID, I had a firefighter friend get COVID on the Dixie fire and die. I've had my firefighter friends have their children in my class a lot because it's a small town in the classes that I teach. And I've had a firefighter friend die in the off season of a heart attack while his son was in my wife's class and now his daughter's in my class. I've had a firefighter student, or the son of a firefighter I had last year. Sorry, I'm losing it, but a student in my class last year, whose dad I worked with for 8 years, had died in the off season too, unexpectedly. So the trauma carries on after I've left. I know I'm about out of time. These are just some of the things in fire, the culture, you're never late. There's no excuses. Everything's 100 miles an hour. You're supposed to deal with suffering, never complain. You live primitive. You have this intense love and loyalty for the people that you like. And then you can build hatred for people in your job you don't like because everything's so high risk, and it changed the way that I treat people and communicate with people. So I'm working on becoming better at communicating with people outside of fire because it's like I operate on a different frequency. Like if you have a narrow band radio or a simplex duplex radio, or one radio is hitting the repeater and the other one's not. That's how I feel sometimes when I try to communicate what I'm thinking to people outside of fire, because I've been indoctrinated into the way that firefighters communicate. And all of this hurt my family, my wife and my children and my friends. And these are things I'm working on to get better. And I think I'm pretty much out of time. The only other thing I could say is the things that worked for me was leaving fire, being transparent about it, not drinking alcohol at all, exercising, accepting that it's part of me, feeling it, talking about it when I need to, not talking about it when I don't want to, finding safe activities that activate my lizard brain, like lifting weights, running, even trying to learn how to skateboard, things that get me excited, like fire used to, trying to find replacements for it. And then remembering the good things about fire, all the things that I loved. And then the last thing that's helped me is just spreading my my story, because it's not unique in the Forest Service, and I really don't think it's unique with other first responders. And that's it. Unless if you want to move to questions or anything, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Mike, man, people are writing exactly what I think all of us are feeling, which is this is such a moving story, and thank you very, very, very much for sharing this. I think you're hitting a lot of chords here with a lot of people. And if you read, I think you're on your phone, so I could read some of these things to you if you haven't seen the chat yet. I don't know if you've seen the chat messages.
I haven't looked at the chat yet. No, I'm on an iPad right now.
Yeah, no worries. And I'll tell you, I even got a text from someone that said that this guy is saying everything I've ever felt and been dealing with for so long. That says a lot. You know, when I started this conference today, and even this morning when I woke up, the intention was let's touch one life, you know, and we have 350 chances to do it, you know. With the number of registrants that we had. I think that we have 150 on right now. And to me, I mean, from seeing these comments here, you've touched much more than one life. You know, and I have some questions for you. I know that I haven't seen questions in here right now per se. There are a ton of comments, which are very touching comments. And I want to ask you some questions while we're waiting for people to actually, if anybody has any questions, that'll be great too. But I'm seeing tons of comments right now. And, you know, some things that you touched on here, Mike. Catherine, I don't know if you heard Catherine, Reverend Tang speak earlier on. Oh, you were in class, so you probably
Yeah, I was teaching class, yeah.
Yeah. She said, I'm not the same person I was 2.5 years ago, and I don't know if I will ever be her again. And I'm sure that you could relate to that as you look back in your career. Could you tell me more about that and expand on it? As far as not being the same person that you were when you started this career, and do you think you could ever find that Mike back again?
So you broke up a little, but what I'm understanding is that Catherine said that she's not the same person she was 2.5 years ago. And if I'm the same person, and do I think I could find him? Is that correct?
Yeah, if you think that you could find that person again.
I am optimistic that I can, because I find him like I do find him like he's there. He's not gone. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I do find him, and I find him more since I've left fire. Mm-hmm. I couldn't have stayed. I left in the middle of my career. If I would have stayed, I would be probably divorced and maybe dead, I think, if I would have stayed in fire. I find him sometimes when I'm teaching class with my students. I find him sometimes when I'm alone in the woods. I find him when I'm with my wife and kids and we're doing fun things. I don't think I'll ever be the same. I think about fire all the time. Like, probably if I'm blinking my eyes, I think about things that happen in firefighting. It's like that often. And so I don't think I'll ever be 100% the same, but I feel like I'm getting better very slowly. And I think it, and in some ways, not ever being the same is good. I think I learned some things. There are some positives from my career. So, but, so I'm optimistic about it, but I have highs and lows. I go up and down. Right now, I'm pretty low, and I was scared to come on today, and I was really stressed about it. A couple weeks ago, I was feeling better. So it's hit or miss, but 100% the same. No, I won't ever be.
Yeah, you're going to feel great when you're done with this, because then your stress is going to be off, and everybody's going to tell you that you rocked it, and including me. Incredible.
Yeah.
So another thing here that I want to ask you is that, you know, I think that a lot of people in this room could appreciate having what you had said was you had to go to Heidi's wedding, and then the next day you had to go to your buddy's funeral, and that it was all of a blur to you because, you know, and I think that a lot of people run on calls that are so traumatic, and then they have to pretend to be happy And then, but inside of their heart, they're grieving, they're sad, you know, and then they can't relate to the people around them. You had mentioned that earlier on too. You know, not that you, I know how much you love your family, but not feeling like, you know, like anybody would understand what was in your soul, right?
Oh yeah, and that was an extreme part of one of the traumatic things. Not just, you know, that was a very extreme example with my friend's funeral, but just the daily life and the daily shift to go from being on the wildland fire line for 14 days, spiked out in the wilderness, you know, with no contact with the outside world, then to come back to the world for 2 days and just go to the grocery store. Those things were traumatic for me. I was like, it was so hard to go back and forth from the world of fire to the regular world. I mean, I just felt really isolated, but I could transition back into fire like that really easily. Like, oh, I can go be firefighter Mike because his decisions matter and he is important and he's good at this and everybody likes him here. But then when I go to the regular world, I'm irritable and weird and I don't understand what's going on. So part of me would just rather be on a fire than be back in the real world. And or even as a dispatcher, to get a suicide call at 6 p.m. or work a wildland fire all day on the radio, and then literally walk in my door 2 minutes later because I'm that close to go from the most traumatic phone calls ever to at 6 o'clock, and then 6:02 I'm walking in my door to be with my kids. Like, how do I transition from that? Like, it made me insane. You know, and I could snap back into fire like that. You could take me out to the fire line right now and I'd be adjusted to it like that. And I would fit right in more so than I think I fit in at my job right now at school.
Yeah. My friend Dominique in West Virginia, she could relate to that. She's an emergency room physician. She leads the emergency room and is a tactical doctor and stuff. And she says, yes, I could relate to that, you know, falling where you matter. You know, when I left Maui, there was a clerk, his name was August, and August in court, he said, hey, Doc, when you leave Maui, you're going to hear you're somebody. And when you move to Arizona, you'll be a nobody. And at the time, we were moving across here for Tava's job. And I told him, I said, well, I'll be a somebody to the person that counts, which is my daughter, because I was going to be a stay-at-home dad, right? But it's funny because as I think about that and I hear your story, Mike, and then I think about how people in public safety say it's a calling, that they have a calling, you know? It's funny how we listen to the calling of our profession, but we miss the calling of our family. And I'm so happy and proud that you listened to the calling of your family when you looked at your son and you said, hey, I need to be around and I need to be there for my son. I think that that's huge. You know, we miss the calling sometimes of being a family person, of being with our kids.
Oh yeah. And I have a lot of friends who stayed in fire and they're still in it and they're gone all the time. And some of their kids are in my class and I can just see it on their face when mom or dad is gone, you know, because I worked with plenty of women who are mothers that are hotshots, you know, and they're out there and these kids, like that time, you don't get that time back. You just don't. And be gone for 5 or 6 months and have your kids worried about you. And then you come home, but you're not really you because you're physically exhausted and mentally exhausted. Like it's really a difficult thing to watch. And I think I couldn't have done it. Like my son was, when I left dispatch, which I consider pretty much just like firefighting, my son was almost 5 and my daughter had just turned 2. And I'm so happy because you don't start remembering things in life until you're about 4 or 5. So my daughter will never remember me as a firefighter. And my son only has little tiny memories of maybe sitting in the truck or whatever. But I'm so happy that my kids will never remember me as a firefighter. And that's a hard thing to say because I'm proud of it. And I'm not trying to knock people who do it and stay in the game. That's not what I'm trying to say. But it was becoming so self-destructive for me that I wouldn't want my kids to remember the lows that I had, you know. And I know there are people who can do it and manage it and have that work-life balance. And in no way am I trying to attack people or say it's wrong to do it. But me personally, I could not do it.
Yeah, well, brother, you have a lot of comments inside of this chat room that I think that you should respond to personally.
Okay.
I think that they're, really incredible. We've had people related it to being a combat vet, going back for multiple tours. Something that you had said was, and I don't want to misquote you but I really loved it, which is you had said that the way that you dealt with fear was by immersion in danger. And I think that that is something that people re-traumatize themselves constantly on because they're trying to figure out how do I beat this, right? And as you said, hey, look, I'm a single guy. I don't have anything to lose. I could go back for an next tour. I could go back for another tour. I could go back for another tour. And then before you know it, that's your whole identity, right?
Oh yeah, it was, yeah, totally, like totally bought into it. And good or bad, there's great parts about it too. I could sit here for 10 hours and tell you all the great things that happened too. But yeah, I just kept going and going. Just kept rolling and rolling and rolling.
Yeah. Mike, I'll leave you on this note. Thanks for giving me hope for the future. Jane says this to you. Please take some time to go through all of this and read all of these amazing comments, man. And thank you. And we love you. And we look forward to seeing you soon. You will.
Okay. Thanks to everybody. And I love you too, brother. And thanks again, everyone. I love all you guys. I don't know you, but I love you.
Thanks, man. See you, Mike.
See ya.